Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the VirtualBoy and the HyperFlash32. New purchase of mine, just been delivered. This is a Rom Cart, selectable Rom Cart for the VirtualBoy. Okay, so this is my VirtualBoy. It comes on a stand. It's got like that visor that you look through. This is the joypad. That consists of an on-off switch in the centre, a D-pad to the left, start and select button, two buttons and another D-pad. Underneath you've got like two trigger buttons and a battery pack. Mine's running on an AC adapter at the moment, but when as standard it has a battery pack there. This is the underside of the VirtualBoy. You've got the controller input, a link cable input, your headphone socket and your volume control and your cart slot. This is the HyperFlash32, the Rom Cart that I'm going to review today. This is the HyperFlash32, created by Mellotts. I hope I pronounced that right. It's got a select and a B button. That's what controls the HyperFlash. It's got a USB connection and an SD card. There's the files on the left that you need to have on the SD card for it to work. Little dust cover to stop muck getting in the cart. To get this cart to operate, you've got to connect it to a power supply. That can be a PC or a USB drive like I've just put in there. Put the power on, and that allows the power to select your game. You pre-select the game before you enter it into the VirtualBoy. Very clean, nice little device, well thought out. So what I'm doing now is just using the A and B buttons to go into the menu system. A short press moves you up and down, a long press changes the page. So there I am going through the different A I think is up and B I think is down. So obviously once you've selected the game of choice, you press the select button, and what that does then, it makes the cart load the game ROM into the actual system's memory, so it's therefore ready to be played on the actual VirtualBoy itself. The process of uploading the ROM into its memory is supposed to take between 15 and 90 seconds. I've sped this up a little bit because we don't want to be sitting here looking at this. So that's it, basically loading it into its memory. Once it's done, it then displays a tile of your choice. You can, when you're loading the ROMs in, you can decide what templates you want to display to show the game. That one's obviously the Waterworld template, but I don't particularly want to play that. Go down and pick another game. Very nice and clean. The display holds the tile once you've disconnected the power, so you know what game was left in there. So that's it. Loading another ROM in. It's not that long really. It loads in pretty quick. Once you've loaded your ROM, then you just disconnect the power and you can obviously pop it into the VirtualBoy, just like we're going to do now. Rather than do it on an emulator, I decided to actually take some footage of it directly off my VirtualBoy. I thought it was a bit more realistic. VirtualBoys nowadays are starting to get a little bit thin on the ground. The technology that Nintendo decided to use between the displays is like a vibrating mirror setup. I've got an up and coming video of me doing a repair on one of my other VirtualBoys, but the ribbon basically becomes disconnected. It's not soldered on, it's glued on, and over time the glue disintegrates and you end up with lines, or the actual display doesn't work at all. But I've got that video at some time in the future to do. This VirtualBoy is all original. I do have one of them has been modified, but this is all original, this one. Actually, not a bad game to play. This is probably one of the best games, Wario Land. Actually quite fun to play. It's difficult to get over the point because it's not, you haven't got that 3D, but it is really fun to play. Even though it's red and black, it is quite entertaining. a lot of cracking ideas. You know, the depth of field was used to clever effect, because you can go, you know, later on in this little snippet, you can see me going into the sort of like jumping over to the back of the screen, which is really quite novel. I think if they'd have probably spent a little bit more money and gone for a colour screen, I think this would have been an absolute classic and a winner. But I suppose at the time the costs involved made it a little bit of a problem for Nintendo to bring it to market. While this is playing, we'll talk about a little bit of the history. Virtual Boy was pretty much a misunderstood console. I don't think it was for what Nintendo actually envisaged it to be. People took it quite differently, and maybe even successor to the Game Boy, which it really wasn't. It was supposed to be a portable device, which it clearly isn't. Released by Nintendo in 1995, it used a monochromatic red-black screen. It had a visor, obviously, because it needed the dark, and you to be quite close to the screen, just so you can get the 3D effect. And it was obviously that 3D effect which was the main selling point of this unit. The unit ran off 6 AA batteries. Obviously, that's why I tend to use the mains adapter, because it does gobble batteries. Only 14 games were ever released in the United States, and 22 in Japan. The system was cancelled pretty much about a year after its release, which was pretty a shame. It never got to Europe or the UK, where I am. Like I was saying, the 3D effect was created by 2 oscillating mirrors, and that was why it was not really supposed to be used by younger children. So that again, it put off a lot of parents from buying it for their kids. The unit was actually fairly powerful. It used its main processor was an NEC V810. It was a 32-bit RISC processor running at 20 MHz. It had 1 meg of DRAM and 512 kilobytes of PSRAM, 1 kilobyte of cache, and the effective technology was a high resolution LED display running at 384 by 224 pixels at 50 Hz scan range. It was 16-bit stereo, and it had built-in speakers. It did have a serial port, like I was saying, that you could do a link cable, and that ran at about 50 to 100 kilobits per second. It weighed about 800 grams, give or take. Actual ROM cartridges themselves were 128 megabit addressable ROM space, 60-pin connector, and they were made by Toshiba, and the chips were running in 16-bit mode. The release of the Virtual Boy didn't really go as how Nintendo expected. There's talk about normally there's massive queues for when Nintendo release new hardware, and basically they weren't to be seen. They reckon that about 770,000 of these units were actually sold. They reckon about 140,000 were sold in the United States and 630,000 were sold in Japan. Like you say, the system never saw any other releases in Europe, Australia, etc. In America, Blockbuster Company actually allowed you to rent the system for about $10 a night. What ultimately killed the Virtual Boy was the monochrome display, the unimpressive effect of 3D, lack of portability, and health concerns for younger children all made this really a commercial failure, and obviously Nintendo dropped it just after a year of release. I think the Virtual Boy really was a remarkable piece of equipment. You know, the red and black display doesn't really bother me that much. I think the quality of the games, you know, like you say, Wario Land and Hyper Fighter, you know, really quite good games. The control pad wasn't good for a fighting game, but no, I enjoyed it nonetheless. So what score would I give the HyperFlash32? Well, a resounding 10 out of 10. Absolutely loved the communication of the seller, loved the purchasing process, delivered when they said it was going to be delivered, and the actual unit itself is gorgeous. Thank him very much. Really enjoyed this little look back on the Virtual Boy. It's great to see it getting a bit of love, and thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon. Bye.